It's Sunday, June 12, 2022, and welcome to the 18th episode in this series from MeidasTouch and 5-Minute News called The Weekend Show, where we take a deep dive into the news of the week. Download this show as audio in addition to my daily 5-Minute News podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Joining me today is founder of Muller, She Wrote and the Daily Beans podcast, Dr. Allison Gill. Allison, hi.
Hi.
Welcome
Thank
to The Weekend Show. You're in California unusually today, is that right?
Yes. Well, yeah. I'm based in San Diego, but I'm up in Los Angeles today. Mm-hmm.
Right. So we're in a similar time zone, which kind of makes a change for this show. Normally, people are kind of all over the country, and I'm a bit jet lagged myself. So we're gonna kind of steam through some of the big stories of the week. It's an exciting week because obviously the January 6th committee are finally going to be putting their public trial out on primetime television. It's kind of something that I believe probably should have started at the very beginning of this rather than, waiting all of this time. I would have watched this in the same way that people watched the Michael Jackson trial or the O.J. Simpson trial. This is certainly something that is in the public interest, probably more so than those two examples. So, Thursday night is when it all kicked off in prime time. How important is it for us to see what the January 6th committee are doing?
Well, I think when you say how important is it for us, who is us, right? Because for folks like you and I who follow this stuff very closely, these hearings aren't for us. I think these hearings are for, John Doe on 123 Happy Street, American Citizen Avenue, who doesn't have any idea who Roger Stone is, for example. And so I think what would please folks like myself and pundits and wonks and who are into this would be deep dives into the details, kind of things that we would see in speaking indictments. And I don't think we're going to get that. And I think that aside from a lot of members of the Republican Party trying to put out their own disinformation and opposition campaign while these hearings go on, I think there's going to be a lot of maybe unhappy or disenchanted Democrats who really follow this stuff closely, who might say something like, well, why didn't you bring up Roger Stone? Why aren't you not talking about Alex Jones? Why aren't you, talking about that? And I think it's important for people to understand who these hearings are for and what they're for. And also that these hearings they don't exist to hold people criminally accountable. It's just to tell the average American what happened on January 6th and whose fault it was.
Do you think the average American realizes the magnitude of the events of January 6th? I mean, because my concern is that it's been rubbished by the Republicans. Obviously, they don't consider it to be a bipartisan effort. They talk about it as being the Democrat-controlled hearing, despite Adam Kinzinger, despite Liz Cheney. They've effectively, they refer to those as Republicans in name only, right? So that they don't really care for this. They don't want the public to know who is responsible fundamentally, because that's really what this is about, isn't it? Yes, they charged people with criminal damage, but fundamentally we need to know whose idea this was, who organized it, and hopefully let's see them prosecuted. But this is fundamentally about American democracy going forward, isn't it? And Republicans just try to delegitimize this entire committee.
Yeah, and they're having a hard time doing that, too. At one point in the courts, there have been multiple occasions where January 6th defendants are trying to question the legitimacy of the court, and also people who the Department of Justice are trying to get documents from, questioning the legitimacy of the January 6th committee. Did I say of the court? I meant of the January 6th committee. And going back as far as we remember when this committee was formed, McCarthy was able to put forward 5 people, and Nancy Pelosi said, no, we can't have actual fascists, insurrectionists on the committee. That would be a bad thing. So you can't have, Jim Jordan, you can't have Jim Banks. And instead of picking a few new people to be on the committee, McCarthy did whatever Trump told him to and just picked up his toys and went home, which is a common Trump trick, by the way, to just pick up your toys, smash them, and leave. And so, now they're arguing, well, we didn't even get a chance. No, they had every single chance to put legitimate Republicans that they, when I say that, I mean what they would consider legitimate Republicans on the committee, and they didn't. So it was up to Nancy Pelosi to make sure that it was a bipartisan committee, and every single court has upheld that it is a legit committee under 503 Resolution 503 under the rules of the House, and that it can go forward, and it is a legitimate thing. They have a legitimate legislative purpose, so they will howl about this, but. No, to answer your first question, I don't think most Americans understand how close we came to losing our democracy on that day. How many different systems, how many points had to hold in order for us to keep our democracy that day. And that is what the job of this committee is to show everyday Americans just how close we came to Donald Trump stealing the White House, installing himself as president with the help of a massive hub and spoke conspiracy. And I think that's a hard job, especially, when we have over 1,000 witnesses in just over a year. Mueller had 500 witnesses in twice the time, and it was still a 500-page report that came out. So to put all this together is going to be a gargantuan task, and I'd like to think that Jamie Raskin, Adam Schiff, the 40 or so former Department of Justice, former U.S. prosecutors, people like Tim Heaphy, are up to the task. But we will see.
We think of people like Adam Schiff and Jamie Raskin as being, heroes, and they're both great lawyers outside of, being politicians. But if you were to watch Fox News, which I do because it's important to see everything and operate outside of your echo chamber, these people, Shifty Schiff and the like, these people have been undermined so much by right-wing media and Donald Trump himself, who hates Adam Schiff, as you know, because of, he was in charge of his impeachment trial. So, or one of his impeachment trials. It's just crazy that there was two. These people are illegitimate as far as, if we think that they think that Kinzinger and Cheney are illegitimate, think how illegitimate Raskin and Schiff are. I mean, these people don't hold water as far as most Republicans are concerned. So my fear is, and I'm sure you share a similar, but I'm keen to hear, in the same way that Bill Barr got up and paraphrased the Mueller report in a press conference the morning that it was being released and rewrote the report, in words, to give Trump the excuse that he was not guilty. And, he famously held up that newspaper saying that he'd kind of been exonerated. Could that happen here? Will the Republicans just turn around after these public hearings and just go, well, the whole thing is a sham, and just rewrite history in a press conference?
Well, they will definitely try to do that. 100% that they'll be trying to do that. We've already seen memos that they're putting together in opposition of these hearings that are just absolutely full of falsehoods. I think probably what's good about this, though, is that, well, first of all, those super diehard Trump supporters aren't the people. Again, that's not who the hearings are for, right? They're not going to change those minds. People who have their heels dug in on certain sides aren't changing their minds over this. But when you have folks like Tim Heaphy doing the questioning instead of Adam Schiff, people who the Americans, en masse aren't going to recognize and immediately have negative feelings about if they happen to be Republican. And I think that there's a difference between, I hope there's a difference between an attorney general putting out that disinformation and Tucker Carlson.
Right.
At least to the average American, maybe not necessarily to the ultra MAGA, as President Biden calls them, but I think to the average American, they can make that distinction, hopefully.
It's very interesting to me as a British person living in America, seeing the only way you really kind of cut through to the average American is to kind of put this show on instead of Home Improvement, just to make sure that it's just, on that kind of Thursday night prime time CBS ABC, NBC, just to make sure that it's all being carried. I mean, why has it been so difficult to kind of press home the importance of these hearings, but also this investigation in its entirety to the average American? Because, as far as I can see, most people kind of think it's business as usual. And I'm running around thinking, America is over, the experiment has failed, and yet everyone's just going about their business.
Well, we're a celebrity obsessed culture. It's evident. I mean, if when I remember when Childish Gambino put out his video for "This Is America," that was one of the messages at the forefront of that, right? And I think that is, and in some instances, I'm not trying to be generational. I'm not trying to say that this is a specific generation. This goes across all generations. We've just become more focused on those kinds of dramatic things. And right or wrong or good or bad, I mean, we could spend hours talking about whether we think that's good for a society or bad for a society. That's where you have to find society when you want to talk about things like this. And that's why Donald Trump did so well with certain groups of people, because he was on television, and we need to take a good look, I think, at ourselves as far as our politics are concerned, and either, because are we going to really pull back to the days where people cared about stuff like Watergate hearings, or are we going to have to adapt to where society is moving? It's a kind of a chicken and an egg thing too. Like, does one feed the other? And so, I mean, we are where we are, and we just that's I think why they brought in a producer of crime shows to help put on these hearings, is because they're like, look, we got to reach the people where they are. We've got to get them interested. That's why I did the Mueller podcast as a comedian with swearing, was so that, because that Mueller report was a snoozer, man. But if we make it funny and entertaining, and we bring it down into bite-sized digestible bits that people can understand, then that's how we reach people. That's where we find people.
That was what was clever about Bill Barr's behavior as the Attorney General at the time, when he paraphrased it and rewrote it. He knew that nobody had read it. He knew that it was not a page turner. He probably hadn't even read it himself. But I just get a sense that, I love America. I choose to live here, but I also recognize that there are so many shortcomings in terms of its legitimacy, legally, in terms of justice, and I fear that there are so many opportunities to take advantage of the rules, just the way in which the Constitution is translated, and it means different things to different people, and how a Second Amendment can be a semi-automatic weapon these days. I mean, everything is open to interpretation here, and everybody will stand by their version of events, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, I'm reading a great book right now called Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution. It's Elie Mystal's take on the Constitution. Right. And he talks about this. He talks about how the court itself set up a system to make it seem like they were making objective balls and strikes calls, when really it's a system that they can utilize to wrap around whatever sort of bigoted thing they want to do that day. And I highly recommend everybody pick up that book, but that's what's going on. They did it with the Second Amendment, with regards to the messaging being, well, we need these weapons for self-defense. That's not in the Constitution. Yeah. And they always say shall not be infringed, but they never say well regulated. It's just they point at very specific things. But yeah, one of the great things about that book that I will recommend is it gives you great talking points to take to your Uncle Frank at Thanksgiving. Because he does this too. He finds Americans where they are. He meets them where they are and breaks these down into arguments that you don't have to have a Yale law degree to understand. But as you know, we have people with Yale law degrees who are going out and defacing these ideas and ideals. Josh Hawley, for example. And so it's that Kennedy guy, right, who pretends to be like a hick from Mudville. Yeah. And we can go back to George G.W. Bush, who was a cheerleader at Yale. He went to Andover Prep, but he was like, I'm a cowboy. So it's interesting that sort of how that has all taken shape, how those politics have taken shape, and trying to, some people trying to reach Americans where they are, others trying to manipulate them where they are.
Let's talk for a second about how people have changed their story. I'm thinking about Kevin McCarthy and Ted Cruz, people who the day of and the day after the insurrection said all of the right things, didn't they? They Ted Cruz referred to it as terrorists, right? And and McCarthy, it's all on tape. I mean, this is the crazy thing. All of this stuff is recorded of what they said, up in Congress and in the Senate. And then they all one by one go and meet with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. They have a meeting, and then within a few days, their story is completely different, and they've turned on their heels. What do you think he has over them, and how is it possible that people in such responsible positions can completely turn on a dime when it comes to the most important subject in American political history?
That's what I don't get either. Going back to Lindsey Graham on the golf course, from changing from Trump's a kook, we're going to lose our democracy if we elect him, to being one of his biggest supporters after spending some time on the links. And I was like, what is it? And, I keep thinking back to things like, well, when the DNC and the DCCC were hacked by Russia, so was the RNC. And those emails were never weaponized for public use. So I'm wondering if maybe it's something like that. There's some sort of compromise. I mean, Trump, he operates like a mafia boss, right? Kind of a stupid mafia, but still a mafia boss. Is it that? Is it something that concrete? Or is it just this abstract fear that if Donald Trump doesn't like you, you could lose your reelection? I think that's why it's interesting what's going on in Georgia right now with Kemp and Raffensperger winning. And we're seeing people who Trump absolutely hates. We're seeing voters not care about that particular thing. But obviously it's way too late for people like Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy to change their tune again back to what it was originally when we recorded them saying that 1-6 was a tragedy.
But the fact that Trump hates Brad Raffensperger is proof that he tried to overturn the election, because Brad Raffensperger stood up to him and refused to try and find one more vote more than they already had. I mean, there's so much evidence, just obvious stuff, to suggest that Trump is the mastermind of this entire bid to overturn the election. And yet I fear that all of this will fail in the courts, and Trump, another rich white guy, is going to walk free.
Well, there's two levels of that, right? Will the DOJ fail, or will the courts fail, or both, or neither? What I need to make sure happens is it's not my job, but what I would prefer that I see happen is the Department of Justice do their job. Because we have evidence in the public sphere that Donald Trump and John Eastman, for example, violated at least 2 federal criminal laws. And that's obstructing an official proceeding, 1512C2, and 371, which is conspiracy to defraud the United States. We have that evidence in the public. We've seen it all written up. A judge has said as much by a preponderance of the evidence these crimes occurred. So what I think is the Department of Justice, if they do not prosecute, if they decline to prosecute Donald Trump or John Eastman for this particular huge conspiracy, then that means they did so because of what's called prosecutorial discretion, which means they thought it's politically bad, or it could cause violence, or the risks don't outweigh the benefits, or it's just not the right, whatever it is, it's some subjective reason, not.
But it will be all of those, won't it? It'll be all of those, because you could argue that it will cause violence, and some have said it could cause a civil war. And because, fundamentally, the Republicans, many of whom, including Kevin McCarthy, refuse to accept that Biden is the legitimate president. And despite everything that's gone on and all of the cases in court that have been thrown out because there's just no evidence to support Donald Trump's case, they are sticking with this thing called the big lie, which they've weaponized as well. You know, they're kind of switching the big lie around and saying the big lie is that Democrats are lying about the fact that we lost the election.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think the Department of Justice should meet the moment and say that the benefits of holding people accountable outweigh the risks. I don't like the idea of not going after someone because you're scared of them. That sort of undermines the whole no one's above the law, especially at this moment in history, which is replete with important points. Now, the second part of that equation, though, because the DOJ might say, you know what, we could bring charges, but, you know, we're worried that we won't win. And if we do bring a charge against Trump and he's acquitted in court, we're toast, right? But what's worse, not bringing the charge or bringing it and having him acquitted? And that's up to the courts and the jury, right? And so the way I see it is I think it's incredibly important for the Department of Justice to bring charges, if they have the evidence, which I think they do, beyond a reasonable doubt. They can prove it and obtain and sustain a conviction. If they believe they can do that based on the evidence, the facts and the law, which they continue to say they will follow, and wherever they may lead, if they have that, they need to indict. They need to prosecute, regardless of how a court or a jury might act. And that's I think what you were saying your fear is, that the jury might be hung, or there might be, you know, a mistrial and they retry and it gets overturned on appeal. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is that the Department of Justice bring the charges. That's the deterrence, right? To me, that's the deterrence. And that's, I think, what hopefully they do, because I fear if they don't, then that's going to be the biggest mistake in the history of the Department of Justice.
So let's talk for a second about Merrick Garland and whether or not he's, you know, the right man right now. I mean, do you put your faith in this guy? I have mixed feelings about him, because I've heard him be very humane in his thoughts and very. I don't think he's a bad person. You know, I think he's a good person. I think he's on the right side of history. But I also feel, and of course he, you know, could have become a Supreme Court judge, but was, blocked by Republicans. I think I have just a very simple question, which is, do you put faith in this guy? Is he going to close the deal, or is he going to drop the ball?
Well, the thing is that I don't think about Merrick Garland that way, because he's not the one investigating. He's not the one who has to recommend and bring charges and go to court. That's Matthew Graves. That's the DC U.S. attorney. And he's got a great team working with him over there. Now, of course, if Matthew Graves wants to bring an indictment against Donald Trump, he will have to go to Merrick Garland and say, this is what I think, and talk Garland into it. Because Garland seems to me like and he's testified to this under oath on many occasions. If you bring me a recommendation and it's reasonable, I'm going to sign off on it. He's not going to interfere or curtail any investigation. So what brings me hope about this is that Matthew Graves has already shocked me with his gravitas, if you will, because I was saying for this whole time, for like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, you know what? They're not going to go for treason. They're not going to go for seditious conspiracy or insurrection. Those are so hard to prove. The last time we tried to bring seditious conspiracy charges was in 2010. We lost. They were all acquitted. In 1988, we lost. They were all acquitted. These are notoriously hard charges to make stick. Let's just stick with obstructing an official proceeding. 1512C2. It's way easier to prove, and it still carries a 20-year maximum sentence. So why not just go with that? But Matthew Graves said, nah, these are seditious conspiracists. And he slapped those charges on there when he didn't have to. And because he feels, first of all, he's gutsy. And second of all, he feels that the evidence is there. He has to, I'm sure he's got to be so convinced, given the track record of trying to bring seditious conspiracy charges, that he's like, no, this is a case. We have a stronger case than any of those other cases, which were really strong. And so that says to me that he has chutzpah. And that makes me think that he will indict Eastman and Trump, at least for their conspiracy.
Can we talk about Eastman a little bit? Because I don't think people know, other than, he's the man in the hat, I don't think people really know who this guy is. And, I find him kind of fascinating because he's one of these, unscrupulous lawyers, right? Because Trump was running out of decent lawyers to have work for him. People just did not want to be, they just didn't want to, attempt to represent him because, the things he was asking for were impossible. So he ended up with a gallery of curios. And Eastman really is one of the few lawyers who was kind of prepared to step up to the pulpit. I mean, he certainly did on the 6th of January and made quite a compelling speech before Donald Trump got up. So let's just talk about this guy, and if you feel that he will be on the receiving end also of a seditious conspiracy charge.
I do, based on Judge Carter's language. But yeah, when everyone's telling you, dude, you lost. There's no fraud. The Attorney General, Bill Barr, is telling you that. Your White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, is telling you that. Every reasonable human being is telling you that. The only people you can dig up to find that would say that the election was stolen are like an overstock CEO and a pillow guy. It's like, that's how bottom of the barrel this is. And Eastman's in that group, right? He's in that legal group. And I think what happened with this latest ruling about his emails, he's got now 2 emails that had to be handed over to the committee. Many, many more he had to hand over to committee, but 2 that fell under the crime fraud exception. And this latest one shocked me. It was so interesting, let's just say that, because there's an old adage in the government here in the United States that says it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. Meaning if you're working in the government and you want to get something done, just do it, and then we'll deal with the aftermath later. Yeah. But that's usually for like if you're going to get a tattoo or, go take an hour-long lunch. That's not like overturning the government. But that's exactly what they were doing in this email. They said, look, we should stay away from the courts. We don't want to file any lawsuits that challenge the Electoral Count Act, because if we lose and they say Pence is bound to open and count the votes as they are, our whole thing is tanked. Our whole scheme is tanked because we will have gotten an answer from the courts before we try to do this. So let's just go do it and see where the chips fall. That is intent up and down 10 ways to Sunday that what you're doing is illegal. With these new emails in Georgia from a Trump campaign person to the fraudulent slate of electors saying you have to do this in absolute secrecy, that shows intent. And so, yes, Eastman, and the way that Judge Carter linked Eastman and Trump together like 30 times in this last ruling, he calling it Trump and Eastman's plot to overthrow the election. Trump and Eastman's plan, scheme, whatever. It's not like alleged scheme or individual one's scheme. It is by name these 2 gentlemen. And so, yes, I do think that Matthew Graves is going to be able to bring charges against them, at least for obstructing an official proceeding and defrauding the United States.
I often think about how the world felt during the Watergate scandal. I wasn't kind of quite there, but I mean, I've read enough to know that it was massive, right? This was massive. And yet there was, compared to this, there was barely any evidence, There was obviously the tapes, which obviously put, Nixon in the right in the center of the conversation. But fundamentally, here we live in an electronic world now. The only thing that was recording back then was in the Oval Office, whereas everywhere else now seems to be there's a recording, there's a tape. It's amazing how many people were recording conversations. We're starting to hear this from various journalists even, who are putting books out, and they go, oh, well, I happen to have a tape of this. Have a listen to this. And it's incredible how much recording was done, how much access to text messages we have, considering that people use encrypted messaging like WhatsApp or iMessage. Are you telling me that people are still using cellular text message to send their messages, which can be... I'm amazed. And so there is this electronic trail, not just a paper trail, but an electronic trail. I mean, this is beyond a reasonable doubt for any stupid person to see that Trump committed a treason, effectively. He tried to commit a fraud against the very country that had elected him as president. I'm talking about America, not Russia. So, so how do we qualify this? I mean, this is massive. And I mean, it definitely warrants prime time, but it also, in my view, warrants more interest from the public at large.
I think we'll see that interest when indictments happen. I think that's where we're going to get the details. And when amazing people who host podcasts like you put it out in a way that's not like a Mueller report snoozer, but more like, here's the top 5 things that you could take away from this. And it's interesting that you bring that up with the obviousness of these crimes, right? Because what you're talking about here with January 6th, with Watergate, it was the cover-up.
Right.
It was the obstruction. In the Mueller investigation, we had this whole huge Trump-Russia investigation, but what got him, or what should have got him if we could indict a sitting president? The cover-up, the obstruction. When we're talking about 1/6, we're just talking about the original crimes, the underlying crimes. We don't know, but there is probably, and I would be willing to bet my paycheck on it, an entire investigation into people trying to obstruct the January 6th investigation. Just as there was an entire investigation into obstruction for Watergate and the Mueller investigation. I don't see how it couldn't exist. And if that ends up being what people got on, that's fine too. But you're right. The evidence of the underlying crimes is so abundant, and it speaks for itself. But it's also the reason it takes so long. All of these electronic trails and emails. Back then, you just got somebody's files and that's all you had to look through, paper files. But now every single back and forth, we're talking terabytes and terabytes of information, have to be reviewed. And that just takes time and man hours. And I think that, I wish that this Department of Justice, one of the things that I've complained about that Merrick Garland should have done differently, is to show us that he has a sense of more of a sense of urgency by asking for more money, more lawyers, more resources to get these things done as quickly and as expeditiously and correctly as possible. And that sort of seemed to be missing from. But that's so far my only complaint. We'll see what happens, how they decide to prosecute or not, but so far I'm good. But it is slow going.
I feel that what was very clever about the insurrection, that they planned very carefully, was creating a misdirection. So by sending the MAGA people to kind of smash up the Capitol building, that acted as a distraction from the coup, right? The coup was going on inside. The coup was going on in the state legislatures. The coup was going on trying to convince Mike Pence to do Trump's bidding. So there are two very different events here. And I personally see the violence and the mob and the riot as it's been described. I see that as a distraction. I don't actually see that as the crime. And I think what's very interesting in the news coverage that I've seen, which is obviously what most people are viewing, is all this focus on the riot. Well, the riot is irrelevant because, I think it's more shocking. It's a little bit like when the airplanes hit the Twin Towers. It's very visually symbolic. And it's very shocking to Americans to see the sacred state capitol building being attacked by people and windows smashed and Nancy Pelosi's name being ripped off the door and all that stuff. It's very symbolic. But it's not the crime. It's just criminal damage. It's really not the crime. To me, the crime is the President of the United States seeking to overturn the election because he doesn't believe that he lost and can't accept that he lost. Do you see it that way as I do? If they're making a movie of this is the distraction that takes place over here so that the real business can be done over there. Because I don't care for criminal damage. I think it's, you can repaint, you can rebuild, but you can't rebuild a democracy once it has fallen.
Yeah, I don't see it that way. I see the attack on the Capitol as one of the 20 ways that the former president was trying to stop the certification of the election, whether it be the Pence pressure campaign, fraudulent electors, or sending a mob to the Capitol to delay it, because we know that there were phone calls from Rudy Giuliani to Tuberville, for example, like, hey, slow it down a little bit, man. You're going too fast. There was an email from Eastman saying, look, this is these have to be counted today or it doesn't count, which isn't true. And also said, you should definitely be making sure that the things get slowed down. And also, hey, you know what? Why don't we just delay the count for like 10 days? You've already messed up the Electoral Count Act a couple times. What's another little crime? Just, right. Delay the certification for 10 days so we can get our S together, right? But I believe that when going back to when Trump said stand back and stand by, and then tweeted on December 19th, come down January 6th, will be wild. And the Department of Justice itself has connected that tweet to the kicking off of the violent extremist groups. And in order for something to be a criminal conspiracy, you don't have to have met with them and have a written agreement. You can just be two people who want the same thing, stopping the Electoral Count Act and doing overt acts to prevent it. So I think that it's just as much of a crime. And I don't know if they can get him for seditious conspiracy on that, because I don't know what the evidence looks like on the Trump side, but they can definitely do a conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstruct an official proceeding just on the Capitol attack alone.
Let's move on with an interesting story out of Florida. This was published in the Washington Post on the 8th of June. The headline was DeSantis Spokeswoman belatedly registers as an agent of foreign politician. This is Christina Pushaw, disclosure of work for Mikhail Saakashvili, I think is his Russian name, came after contact from the Justice Department, her attorney said. She's an interesting character. I don't think people really realize who is the puppet master for Governor Ron DeSantis. He's somebody who's become very quickly increasingly right-wing, a kind of far-right character, whereas, before I think he kind of played the populist card, and now he refuses to denounce a Nazi demonstration. And thinks he has the power to take on the mighty Disney. Who is this person, and how serious is it that she spent a few years working for the Russians?
Well, we didn't get any charges, right? What we got was the Department of Justice poking at her, saying you need to register. But what this reminds me of, this to me is that, like, DeSantis is the Yanukovych of the South, right? Manafort was hired to but make Yanukovych a likable guy, whitewash his image in the media so that he could be the Russian-backed separatist leader of a reclaimed Eastern Ukraine, all part of the Ukraine peace policy that Donald Trump was putting forward, which basically carved up, Donbass and Crimea, gave it to Putin and put Yanukovych back in charge, who had already fled and been kicked out of the country. But that was Manafort's job. And so when I see something like this, somebody who's almost like a Simona Mangianti kind of a character, this is like the Manafort for DeSantis, right? Somebody who but we don't yet know the connections, if she was directed at all by this Georgian president, who's a Russian Putin backer, to do anything, to groom DeSantis, to be part of anything like that. We don't know the depth of it. I feel like if there were evidence for that, there would have been a 951 charge or a FARA violation charge, some sort of criminal charge, rather than just a, hey, you should register. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good at all, considering the way that DeSantis is behaving.
Because, his behavior is unusual, isn't it? There has been, if you were to check the graph, there has been a real ramping up of this kind of strongman ideology. And you could argue that it's because he wants to run for president and, he knows that America likes a strongman. But I don't really recognize him. I study body language and people's behavior. I love it. I find it really interesting. In fact, that moment when he took to a podium and told those kids off standing behind him for wearing masks, take those things off. They don't do anything. Don't be so ridiculous, He was acting, he was putting on a show there for the cameras. He knew exactly what he was doing. So this is a very calculated person. And Florida obviously is we're seeing a lot of heat on Florida at the moment for a multitude of reasons. But I feel like, for me, this Russia connection keeps presenting itself, doesn't it? And I still don't think that people have grasped how the 2016 election was so controlled by the Russians, in the same way that the Brexit vote in England, for example, people just don't understand the consequences of the Cambridge Analyticas and all of these organizations behind the scenes who were involved in changing people's minds, not necessarily changing their vote. We're not talking about voting machines being, infused with Russian technology, but we're talking about calculated social media campaigns, and we're talking about the people who control the money supply making decisions, and it all linking back to the Kremlin. So let's just talk about the legitimacy of 2016 for a second, because, if we were talk about it now, Republicans would just say, well, it's just sour grapes. You're just bitter that Trump won. There doesn't seem to be any desire to get to the truth as to whether or not American democracy is still functioning.
I feel like, 2% of us have read the Mueller report? It's all in there. And of course, Bill Barr over-redacted it inappropriately, as found by Judge, I think it was Reggie Walton, who said, these redactions are inappropriate. And he did that to downplay the scope and breadth of Russia's interference. I feel like when we did our first impeachment, was it the first impeachment of Donald Trump over the Ukraine
the perfect phone call.
The perfect phone call. And we had Masha Ivanovich up there. And I feel like the Ukrainians were looking at us like, are you new? Do you not? They know, they understand what this kind of interference looks like. And that's why it's so important we defend democracy at home as well as abroad, because we could end up looking like Russia. What the way that Putin has stayed in power is through things that Donald Trump tried and failed to do in 2020 on January 6th in 2021. And they won't stop trying. We just got so lucky that these coup plotters are idiots. We might not be so lucky next time. And I that's what I fear, is that we're going to end up seeing presidents come in and stick around for 22 years and flood the airwaves with disinformation to do it. And we aren't going to see it because we're new at it. This is like a new thing for it. It shouldn't be because of what happened in 2016.
But it's a new country, and countries take centuries to evolve, don't they? And there has been a lot of thought and a lot of writing about the fact that the American experiment is so new, and it may not last in its current form. And that's certainly whatever it was that Putin wanted, sowing division, creating chaos, causing this. I mean, the shift now between the left and the right. I mean, it's unrecognizable, right? It's like they couldn't be further apart. They can't even come together on gun control. 19 children get executed, and still Republicans refuse to make any changes, even repealing semi-automatic weapons. It's not on the table for them. I mean, there is a relationship between the NRA and Russia, isn't there?
There's a $30 million relationship at least. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it's at. That's what we're dealing with now. It's like we effectively have sold out to Russia.
I don't know if we've done it on purpose, but we're the tallest hog in the trough as far as world democracies go. So we have the biggest target on our back.
Right.
And that's that they're going to do anything to take that down, and they have, and of course, UK number 2, EU number 2, right? We have Nigel Farage, the Cam Anna, and that whole absolutely, and of course, we'd like to think that if Steve Bannon ever gets arrested or gets shuffled off this mortal coil, our problems will be over. But it will just be handed down to the next person who wants to rip us apart, crack us open, and install autocracy and fascism. We talk about top of the hour.
Let's talk about fascism for a second, because this is something that I refer to it as the F word that Americans refuse to say, and it's not a new concept, right? This is something that we ignore at our peril. And you may have seen that, I'll flash it up on the screen, but you may have seen that kind of fascism, early warning signs of fascism document that was produced, that talks about, it lists nationalism and disdain for human rights and identification of enemies and scapegoats as a unifying cause, and supremacy of the military and sexism and the control of mass media. I mean, these are the things fundamentally that are the foundations of fascism. Disdain for intellectuals and the arts, I always found was interesting. Trump hated the arts. He had absolutely no interest in funding the arts, or he couldn't sit and watch anything. It's like,
it's because these strongmen are untalented. That's
right. Yeah, I mean, unless it had his name in the title, he wasn't interested. And then fraudulent elections is the final thing on this list of early warning signs of fascism, and still, despite this document that has been doing the rounds, in America, people cannot make the connection between the 4 years of Donald Trump referring to the free press as the enemy of the people and the creating a level of division and misinformation that made people hate their fellow man. And still people deny that this is a fascist regime. And in fact, Trump even designated the anti-fascists a terrorist organization. I mean, this is massive. It's massive, and yet we're still worrying about what to order in Starbucks.
I know.
Or people that might have more interest in Elon Musk buying Twitter. I mean, this is massive, and yet there is a denial going on, and I just don't get it, and I'm fascinated to know why.
Well, I think it boils down to being noobs. And then also being egotistical as a country. I mean, we're very egocentric as a nation with our exceptionalism, and we're number one in USA. And we refuse to look at history. We do it within our own history. We refuse to face our demons here. Why would we want to go and see what best practices Germany and Ukraine have used to try to oust their fascist infiltrators, or any other fascist regime that tried to take over another democracy? I mean, that's what fascists do. They try to take over democracies and turn them into autocracies.
Right.
And we're on
but even
9.
removing the education of slavery from schools and calling it critical race theory, that in itself is fascism, rewriting history, right? And yet no one's mentioned it.
An Indiana Jones movie knows what's next.
Yeah.
And I've asked people, because we all started wondering, when Trump was running, we started saying, how long did it take for Germany to fall to fascism? It was fast.
Yeah.
And we all were like, how could that have possibly happened? How could they have just, sort of been in denial about what was going on and just following orders and, I'm not really a Nazi, but, I'm just over here having some cheese or whatever. And it's like, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, now are people still wondering? Because we're so close. And that's what I think these 1/6 hearings need to show. They need to illustrate how close we were to losing our democracy.
But it's likely that the January 6 hearings won't mention fascism either.
No,
I mean, it's almost like it's a word that is used to describe other regimes, other countries, but it's never a word that's used to describe America. And I'm very interested in American exceptionalism. We did a program on it last week with Umair Haque, and talking about these, the fundamentals of this. And I mean, maybe we should be teaching, instead of critical race theory, we should be teaching about American exceptionalism in American schools. I mean, that would, that might go some way to kind of eradicate this ego that you describe.
Yeah, I mean, as long as local school boards being threatened by Republicans would allow that stuff to be taught in a classroom, insofar as that. I mean, they want to arm teachers with guns, not with books. So, I mean, we're at a very critical moment where I feel like we're so far down the slope that it might be hard to get back up.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens. I mean, I'm going to keep fighting, but yeah, I don't think they're going to use the word fascism. I mean, every single thought leader that I talk to on a regular basis, whether it be Wajahat Ali or Mary Trump or, Timothy Snyder, Dr. Snyder, are telling us, don't be afraid to use the F word. Don't be afraid to say fascism. And I think maybe that idea will catch on. But again, we're noobs. We're slow.
I want to talk about Kevin McCarthy finally, because I saw him being interviewed. Well, he was hosting a press conference, and he was asked point blank if Donald Trump should be the legitimate president, and is Biden the legitimate president? And the guy refused a straight answer. I'll show the clip here, just so that people can see that I'm not fabricating this story in any way. Now, this is not just some, backbench politician. This is the leader of the Republican Party in Congress, somebody who is, tipped to be a future Speaker of the House or whatever. And yet, here we have him refusing to say that Joe Biden legitimately won the election. I mean, and in the same breath is criticizing the January 6th committee for the work that they're doing. When he is committing this treason out loud on television in front of a primetime audience before the hearings have even started. I mean, what is it about this big lie? How is it that it is so important to Republicans to sow this concept of confusion? And I've been saying recently, my favorite phrase of the moment is that democracy is exclusive to Democrats. And I fear that actually calling Democrats is unhelpful. Maybe they should be rebranded as Democratic Republicans. But then you've got the word democracy in there again, and then that's not going to help. Republicans have no interest in democracy, it seems. How serious is this?
Well, it's very serious. And the point of the big lie is to create an environment, a political environment, where the people will allow Republicans to make laws that will in turn allow them to disregard the will of the people and install leaders. Right. That's what the big lie does. It allows it allows the Republicans to make those laws. Like, for example, in certain states, they're allowing legislatures to make the final call as to who the electors will be. We've seen this elector scheme with John Eastman, and it's in the law. Hey, no, you can't just decide. In your state, it says you have to go by what the votes are. You can't pick your own electors after the votes are cast. And they're actually making laws that will allow that to happen, just to overturn the will of the people. And by spreading the big lie, you are getting a certain percentage, enough of a percentage of people to believe that there are problems with the elections, that it's totally fine with you if your state legislature picks your leaders instead of you.
Because the partisan element goes deeper than just who's on the ballot. It actually goes down to, well, people are thinking, well, if they are Republican legislatures and then they're picking and choosing, then that's going to fall in my favor because I vote Republican. And so, they will look out for me. And so we're better off this way. And what they're effectively doing is they're not just cheating on the election on the day that it is ratified in the Senate. They're actually cheating at elections throughout the entire process at every level before even people cast their vote. I mean, we're seeing that in Florida with, a team of people knocking on doors to elderly people and saying, "Oh, well, we're just checking that we've got you registered correctly," and then changing their registration.
Sign here, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sign here, exactly, and keeping their finger over the section of the text. Finally, I always love a prediction. I've failed in all my predictions, but I'm very keen to see where you sit on this. I personally think that not much will come from these hearings, and I also think that Trump will live to see another day in the White House. I can really see this happening, which is worrying because he's going to have a vendetta against anybody who's ever wronged him, and the fascism will be greater and more powerful than ever before. And gassing his own people in the street will just become a daily occurrence. Disappearing people off the streets of Portland, well, that'll just happen on the streets of Washington D.C. Frightening. So that's my fear. If you were to make a prediction about these televised hearings, the results of the investigation, and the future, because, currently with gas prices this high, inflation this high, and the war in Ukraine and coronavirus, Joe Biden's got a lot on his hands. And it's very easy for Republican lawmakers to turn around and say, well, when Trump was president, gas prices were $2.50. There was no war because, he
were all at home
Putin.
And we didn't have jobs.
Right. Yeah. Well, they won't mention that bit. Inflation was manageable and COVID wasn't as bad. They can say these things and it sounds very, very convincing. And that is my fear, is that, all of these things will be weaponized. The facts are irrelevant.
Sure.
Biden doesn't have the strength to fight back against these facts. He's not agile enough to answer these types of questions. Yeah. And we will end up with a Trump administration.
Well, the midterms come first.
Right.
And we've got another 2.5 years, almost 3 years before we have to talk about another Trump administration. But my prediction is right now about 53% of Americans think that Donald Trump should be held responsible for January 6th. I think when Americans are repolled after these hearings, you might see it go up about 3 to 5%. Maybe get close to 60%, maybe, which is a good job, honestly, because the Mueller report, 0%. Nobody changed nobody's mind.
All that work.
Despite my very hard-working podcast.
Yeah.
0%. So I think it'll tick it up quite a few points there. Now, with regards to the future, I think the Department of Justice will indict him. It might not come until next year, but I think that they will indict him and Eastman and perhaps others, depending on who. I think that'll happen. I don't know if he'll be convicted or not or go to jail. And even if he is convicted and goes to jail, that doesn't necessarily stop him from running for office again. And a conviction or an indictment might energize his base, but I still think that it's necessary to help with accountability and deterrence in the future.
Right.
We saw, what happened. Hitler went to jail and came out and became Hitler. So the future, I don't know. I think that depends a lot on what we as Americans allow to happen in our communities, in our local governments, in our school boards, and our city councils.
Okay, well, here, hope springs eternal. I'm grateful for your prediction, and I hope that it's your version and not my version. I don't want my version. And I also have a theory that the only reason Trump is running, or, is likely to run, he hasn't announced it officially, is to prevent him from being prosecuted. It's like I'm either going to, be prosecuted for all of this stuff, or I'll just become the president, and then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but that doesn't really stop him from prosecuting. It's just a 60-day window around election time. I think that indictment will come before. But, my outcome doesn't necessarily prevent fascism either.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear about that. It's just kind of what I hope happens in the near term. If that doesn't happen, fascism comes faster.
Yes.
I can tell you that.
Well, thank you for using the F word so appropriately. You're one of very few. Allison, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your podcast and everything that you do. That's Dr. Allison Gill of Mueller, She Wrote. I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to subscribe to The Weekend Show on YouTube or as an audio podcast. And also the 5 Minute News daily podcast, which drops every morning, so you can listen whilst you make your morning coffee. And leave an iTunes review, please. Join me next Sunday morning with a brand new special guest and 3 more factual news stories to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.